The most famous face, the ancient world left behind, belongs to a boy almost nobody truly knew. For a century, the golden mask of Tutankhamun has stood as the very image of a god king, serene, flawless, ageless, beaten from solid gold into a face that was never meant to age. The world looked at that surface and believed it understood him. It was looking at the wrong thing. The truth was never in the treasure. In 2010, a team aimed a scanner and a swab at the body beneath the gold, and what they found was not a god. It was a sick child, born of a union the dynasty had carefully buried. Who his parents really were, what their choice did to his bones, how it ended a bloodline. The secret never sat in the gold. It sat in the blood beneath it. Consider what the tomb actually held before considering what it hid. On a November morning in 1922, after years of digging that had turned up almost nothing, the archaeologist Howard Carter cleared a sealed doorway in the Valley of the Kings and looked through into a room that had not been opened in more than 3,000 years. Strange animals, statues, and gold everywhere, the glint of gold. When his patron asked whether he could see anything, all Carter could manage was that he could see wonderful things. For decades, archaeologists had worked that valley and found only tombs the robbers had emptied. This was the first royal burial to come out of the ground essentially whole, and it made the boy inside it the most famous pharaoh who ever lived. Here's the first strange thing about Tutankhamun. He was a minor king. He came to the throne as a child, ruled for roughly a decade, and died still a teenager, around the age of 19. He reversed his father's religious upheaval and otherwise left little mark on the records of a kingdom that had known far greater rulers. And yet the tomb held close to 5,000 objects, packed into 4 small chambers, far more treasure than the reign itself seemed to warrant. At the center of it lay a coffin of solid gold, weighing nearly 300 pounds, and over the head of the mummy, a mask beaten from gold and inlaid with glass and stone. That mask is the surface this story is about. It is counted among the finest works of art to survive from anywhere in the ancient world, and the reason is not only the gold. The sculptor made 2 things at once and laid them over each other. He made a god smooth and symmetric and eternal, a face that belongs to no particular moment and shows no particular strain. And underneath that idealization, faintly, he left the softer features of a boy of 12 or 13. The version the world remembers is the god. The mask was not built to record what the king looked like. It was built to show what a king was supposed to be, a divine and untroubled face laid over a real and very young one. And that is the second strange thing, the one that would matter most. We possess the face of Tutankhamun more vividly than that of almost any other pharaoh. His golden mask is reproduced on book covers and museum walls and the walls of children's bedrooms across the world. It has become a kind of shorthand for ancient Egypt itself. But for all of that, the boy behind the mask stayed almost entirely unknown. Nobody could say with certainty who his parents were. Nobody could explain how a teenager came to die, or why his short and unremarkable reign was buried under so much gold. The most recognizable face in history sat over a person about whom almost nothing was settled. The gold, in other words, told the world everything about how the boy was meant to be seen and nothing about who he actually was. For that, the surface would have to be set aside, and someone would have to look at the body underneath it. For most of a century, the questions that mattered most about the boy were the ones the gold could not answer. 2 of them sat at the center, and neither would move. How did he die? And who were the people who made him? Take the death first, because it became the louder mystery. In 1968, a set of X-rays was taken of the mummy, and the images showed something at the base of the skull, a fragment of bone loose inside the cranium, and a faint swelling along the lower back of the head. To some who looked at it, that meant only one thing. The young king had been struck from behind. The theory hardened quickly into a story the world wanted to hear, that Tutankhamun had been murdered, that the boy on the golden mask had met a violent end at the hands of someone close to the throne. Other explanations crowded in beside it: a fall from a chariot, a slow poisoning. None could be ruled out, and so all of them survived, each as plausible as the next, none of them settled. It is worth remembering that the man who found the tomb had examined the body himself and come away with nothing conclusive. When Carter and his team finally unwrapped the mummy and reached the king's face, the close study of the remains did not close the question of how he died. If anything, it opened more. The examination, as one scholar put it, fomented dozens of theories rather than ending them. The boy had been looked at directly by careful people, and the cause of his death had still slipped through their hands. The second question was quieter but ran deeper. Nobody could say with certainty who his parents were. The name of his father had been argued over for generations. Many suspected the heretic King Akhenaten, the pharaoh who had set aside the old gods for the sun disk and moved his court into empty desert. But suspicion is not proof, and the records did not state it plainly. His mother was a thinner shadow still. Some pointed to Nefertiti, some to a secondary wife named Kia, some to a woman whose name had simply not survived. His lineage, in the blunt phrase of the field, had divided archaeologists for decades. And this is the shape of the whole problem. For roughly 80 years after the tomb was opened, scholars studied the surface of Tutankhamun more closely than almost any object in the world. They read the inscriptions. They cataloged the 5,000 artifacts. They traced the iconography across the walls and the shrines and the coffins. Everything that could be learned from the outside of the boy was learned, and the answers that mattered remained sealed inside him, in the bone and the tissue that no inscription could speak for. There was a tool, in principle, that could read those answers. It did not exist when Carter stood in the burial chamber, and it would not arrive for the better part of a century. The truth about how the boy died, and the truth about who had made him, were not going to come from another artifact pulled out of the tomb. They were going to have to come from the body itself. The instrument that finally read the body was not a single tool, but a pairing of two. One was the same kind of scanner a hospital uses to look inside a living patient. The other was the slower, stranger work of pulling genetic material out of tissue that had been dry for more than 3,000 years. In 2010, a team led by Zahi Hawass published what it had found in the Journal of the American Medical Association under the title Ancestry and Pathology in King Tutankhamun's Family. It was the first time the DNA of ancient Egyptian royal mummies had ever been read in this way, and it set out to answer the two questions the gold never could. The work was deliberate and slow. Between September of 2007 and October of 2009, the team studied a group of royal mummies, 11 of them placed at the heart of the analysis, examining each one anthropologically, then through the scanner, then down at the level of the genes. To guard against the errors that haunt old and degraded tissue, they did not rely on a single sample. They drew genetic material from 2 to 4 separate points on each body, so that a finding had to repeat itself before it could be trusted. The names attached to the work mattered, because a claim this large needed people who could be held to it. The genetic side was overseen by Carsten Pusch, a geneticist at the University of Tübingen in Germany, and by Albert Zink, head of the Institute for the Study of Mummies in Italy. The laboratory work ran through the Egyptian Museum and Cairo University, and the most important safeguard came at the end. The genetic results were not left to stand on the word of one laboratory. They were repeated independently in a second ancient DNA lab staffed by different people so that the two could be checked against each other. It is worth being honest about where they started, because the honesty is part of what makes the result believable. Of the mummies they set out to study, only 3 had identities that were already certain. The rest were anonymous bodies that had been found in caches and side chambers, stripped of their names by the priests who had hidden them or by the looters who came after. The team was not confirming a family tree that history had already written down. It was building one from almost nothing, reading the relationships out of the markers in the bone because the inscriptions had gone silent. And that is the thing the pairing of Scanner and Gene could do that a century of careful looking never had. It could take a row of unnamed bodies and tell you which of them shared a mother, which shared a father, which were the children of whom. From the markers, the team assembled a pedigree that ran back 5 generations, a map of who had made whom across the most disordered stretch of Egyptian royal history. The map, once it was finished, did not simply name the boys' parents and leave it there. It placed them in relation to each other. And the relationship it described was the one thing the dynasty had taken the most care to keep from view. Start at the top of the tree the DNA assembled, with the people whose names were never in doubt. At the head stood the pharaoh Amenhotep III and his great wife, Ta, a king and queen from the height of Egyptian power. Ta herself had been a mystery until this study reached her. A mummy long known only as the Elder Lady, lying unnamed in a side chamber, was matched by her genes to this royal couple and given back her identity. She was the boy's grandmother. The line from her ran downward, and it ran toward the strangest reign in the whole pharaonic record. Her son was the man whose body had been found in the tomb, catalogued as KV55, and the markers placed him as the father of Tutankhamun. By the weight of the evidence, he is Akhenaten, the heretic king who had set aside the old gods for the single sun disk, the Aten, and built a new capital, an empty desert, before the dynasty erased him. The boy buried in gold was his son. That much the genes made plain. Then came the mother, and the mother is where the secret was waiting. Her body was another anonymous one, a woman known only as the younger lady, found lying beside the elder lady in the same hidden chamber. The DNA confirmed she was Tutankhamun's mother, but it did not stop there. It also read who her own parents had been, and the answer was Amenhotep III and Ta, the same couple at the head of the tree. The boy's mother was the daughter of his grandparents. She was Akhenaten's sister. Set that against itself, and the meaning is unavoidable. The father of Tutankhamun and the mother of Tutankhamun were brother and sister, both children of the same king and the same queen. The God King on the golden mask, the divine and untroubled face the world has admired for a century, was the child of a full brother and a full sister. This is best understood not as a scandal to be judged, but as a deliberate practice of that world. Egyptian royalty married within the bloodline to keep power sealed inside it, to keep the throne from passing to lesser families, and the marriage of siblings was part of how a dynasty held its grip. The choice was not careless. It was strategic. But strategy has a cost, and the one who supervised this study put the cost plainly. In his view, the incest that concentrated the royal blood was the very thing that planted the seed of the boy's early death. Her name, the mother's name, the genes could not give back. She was one of the 5 known daughters of Amenhotep III and Ta, and which of them she was may never be known. What can be ruled out is telling. She was not Nefertiti, and she was not the secondary wife Kia, because neither of those women was ever recorded as Akhenaten's sister, and a sister is what the DNA demands. So the divine surface now reads as a cover laid over a fragile and forbidden origin. And a union that closed does not pass quietly into the next generation. It leaves marks. The same study that uncovered it found them written into the boy's own bones. Look at the body the same way the scanner did, from the bone outward, and the marks of that union begin to stack. The left foot was deformed, turned inward in the condition called a clubfoot. Inside that same foot, a bone was dying. The boy had a rare disorder in which the blood supply to the bone fails, and the bone slowly breaks down, so that walking on it would have grown more painful over the years rather than less. He had a cleft in the roof of his mouth, the same trait his father carried. His spine curved. One of the small bones of a toe was simply missing. None of these alone would define a life. Together, in one teenage body, they describe a person who was unwell from the start. And here a detail from the tomb itself changes its meaning entirely. Among the 5,000 objects Carter recorded were roughly 130 walking sticks and canes. For decades, these could be read as ornament, as the regalia of a king, staffs of office heaped in with the rest of the treasure. The study read them differently. Some of the canes show wear, the kind of wear that comes from a body leaning on them, using them, depending on them. They were not symbols. They were equipment. The boy on the golden mask had needed help to stand and to walk. That single fact inverts the image the art had built. The walls and the objects show a king in the old heroic mode, drawing a bow, riding a chariot into the hunt or the field, the warrior pharaoh in motion. The body says otherwise. The team concluded he could not likely have ridden a chariot unaided, that the frail foot and the failing bone would not have carried him there. As one of the geneticists put it, the picture to hold is not a strapping sun god, but a frail, weak boy who needed a cane to walk. Then the genes found something that had nothing to do with inheritance. In the boy's tissue, and in the tissue of others in his family, the team recovered the DNA of the parasite that causes malaria, the most dangerous form of it, and found signs that he had been infected more than once. It is the oldest genetic proof of malaria ever recovered, and it placed a killer inside a body that was already struggling to bear its own weight. So the death that had been argued over for a century could finally be read. The blow to the back of the head, the murder the world had wanted, was laid to rest, along with the older theories that the royal family suffered from disorders that feminized their bodies. The likely sequence was quieter and sadder. A break in the leg, perhaps from a fall, a healthy young man would have survived, opened the door, and a malaria infection moving through an already weakened body closed it. He did not die by violence. He died because there was very little left in him to fight with. The Golden Warrior, then, was a sick and limping teenager, undone by what his family had built into him and by an ordinary parasite. But the cost of that bloodline did not end with his body. It reached one generation further, into the smallest coffins in the tomb. Among the objects in the tomb were 2 coffins almost too small to notice, and inside them 2 mummified infants. They were the boy king's daughters, both stillborn, and the genetics tied them to him as their father. Their mother was almost certainly his wife, Tutankhamun, who was herself, by the evidence, his half-sister. The bloodline had folded in on itself a second time, and the result was sealed in those 2 tiny bodies. Neither child drew breath. With them died the only direct heirs the boy ever had. That is the quiet catastrophe the gold was laid over. Tutankhamun left no living child, and within a generation, his branch of the family was gone, the strange dynasty of the sun disk burning out in 2 infant coffins. A line that had concentrated its power by marrying inward had concentrated its frailty the same way, until there was nothing left to pass the throne to. And it explains the things about the burial that never quite fit. The tomb was small for a pharaoh and modest beside what a king was owed. The decoration was hurried, the chamber finished in haste. The goods were a jumble, some of them seemingly borrowed or repurposed, as if assembled at speed for a death no one had planned. This was not the burial of a dynasty at its height. It was the burial of one collapsing, improvising the funeral of a boy who had died before anyone was ready, with no heir behind him to steady the throne. Here the claims have to be held carefully, the way the evidence itself demands. The body in Tomb 55 has never been positively named by ordinary archaeology. It is read as Akhenaten by working backward from the genes, but some argue it may be another king of the period, and the mother's name was never recovered at all. These are inferences built on degraded tissue, and inference is not the same as proof. Others have pressed harder. The geneticists Eileen Lorenzen and Eski Willerslev questioned the reliability of the genetic data itself, warning that ancient DNA is fragile, easily contaminated, and easily overread. And the Egyptologist Mark Gabold has offered a different reading of the same numbers. The genetic overlap that looks like a brother and a sister, he argues, could instead be the residue of 3 straight generations of cousins marrying cousins, which would stack up to resemble a sibling bond without being one. If he is right, the boy's mother need not have been Akhenaten's sister at all. She could have been his cousin, and she could even have been Nefertiti. This is the hard limit the object keeps just out of reach, the same way the famous bust of his stepmother could never be dated from its stone. Because the mummies cannot be named with certainty by conventional means, the family tree can never be locked completely shut. The reading can be argued, but every version of it points the same way. Whether his parents were siblings or close cousins, the boy was the product of a bloodline marrying into itself, and that bloodline left its signature in his ruined foot, his curved spine, and his 2 daughters who never lived. The secret survives the argument. The golden mask made him a god. Smooth, symmetric, eternal. It shows exactly what the dynasty wished the world to see: a king without strain and without age, a face that would never falter. The DNA made him a person, a boy who limped on a ruined foot, who leaned on a cane to cross a room, who buried 2 daughters before he buried himself, and who carried his family's choices written into his own bones. The treasure was never the secret. The secret was a bloodline quietly undoing itself, folded inward and inward again, then sealed beneath gold for more than 3,000 years, until a swab read what the surface had been built to hide. The scanner and the swab did to the boy what the embalmers never intended. They looked underneath the gold, and in doing so, they gave back the human the icon had taken away.